Just getting the live stream going. So this can live forever in the Bureau's archive. Yes.
Yeah, it's not tricky, but it's like so related.
Yeah.
Pretty much every year. You want to lift it a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Shall we? Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Bureau and welcome to Outspoken, the September edition of the Publishing Triangle's monthly reading series. My name is Mikey. I'm a volunteer here at the Bureau. The Bureau is an all-volunteer independent queer bookstore that opened in 2012, but has been hosted in the center since 2014. Our regular hours are Wednesday to Sunday, 1 to 7, and we stay open later for events like this one. As a volunteer organization, we are dependent on donations and sales of books to fund our operations. So if you won't be purchasing books, we ask that you consider making a donation to support the work that we do. We'll pass around a bag with some change in it, and you can also make a donation on Venmo. There's a QR code on the bag, and we thank you for your support. If you're not on our email list yet, but you would like to be, you can sign up at the back of the room. There's a clipboard for signups, or on our website, bgsqd.com, click on the boxes. And we send out a newsletter every other Monday with all of our upcoming events. And then before I pass it off, we just want to make a few acknowledgements. The Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape, excuse me. We encourage you to join the Bureau by signing up to make a monthly donation at the American Indian Communities House Manhattan Fund. The Manhattan Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. You can find out more at themanhattanfund.org. We also want to recognize that today, September 25th, is the 355th day of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, funded by our tax dollars and enabled by our government's unwavering support. We hope that you join us in calling for an immediate, permanent ceasefire, the release of all detainees held by Israel, the release of all hostages held by Hamas, and the end to the siege of Gaza, and an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories in order to stop the collective punishment of Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of desperately needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Our greater hope is for peace, justice, and liberation from oppression for all people everywhere. And now, please give a warm welcome to our host, Rob Burns.
Thank you, Mikey, and welcome everybody to Outspoken. We started this series last year as a way to bring a new forum for queer voices in literature, and we're very excited that we've been going now since actually since June of 2023, and happy to, after a brief hiatus over the summer, happy to get this going again. Quick housekeeping, very quick. The Publishing Triangle board is made up of 8 people. We're all volunteers. We have a few other volunteers, but that is it. We have no paid staff. So if you could become a member, you could help us immeasurably. It's only $40 a year, and you can help us immeasurably help continue to deliver programs like this. Next, submissions are open for the Publishing Triangle Awards for books published during 2024. They will be open until December 6th, I want to say. And if you have published a book this year or will be publishing a book before the end of the year, please do submit. The submission fee is only $40, and that is also a bargain by most other organizations. And we actually give a cash prize for the winners of our awards. And finally, remember to always buy queer books and buy them from independent booksellers, especially queer booksellers. So let's get on to the program. We have a great lineup tonight. I'm going to start with Gerard Barrera. Gerard is a naturalized New Yorker from Springfield, Massachusetts, the birthplace of the first American dictionary Dr. Seuss, and basketball. His debut novel, Homo Novus, was published in October 2022. And tonight he'll be reading from The Sharing Economy, taken from his work in progress, a short story collection. And I should also add that Gerard is also one of those 8 volunteer Publishing Triangle board members. Please welcome Gerard Cabrera.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, the Publishing Triangle and the Bureau. And it's great to be here with such wonderful writers and all of you. I am decided to read from a different story. Hope Rob doesn't mind.
Oh, no, but you want to get close to the mic.
Okay, is this better? Proud Mary. Santi put the phone back into its cradle. It was the agency calling about his placement. Let go, just like that. His 2 years at the law firm over. 2 whole years and not a word from the boss. Ray didn't have the nerve to tell him to his own face. Of course, Ray had a private office with a door and a window, not a cubicle. Santi looked down at his phone. He took out his rubbing alcohol and cotton puffs and cleaned the earpiece, then the mouthpiece, and then the keypad. For the last time, he thought. He looked up at the back of Diane's head. Today, her hair was done in cornrows. His hand went up to touch the back of his head and smooth over his bald spot. He looked at Diane, surrounded in her cubicle by cartoons and dolls, all of Betty Boop. He looked at Diane's pictures of the Obamas and Will Smith and Jesus. Diane had been hired the same day as him, and neither of them was getting any younger. Diane had been working the permanent temp assignment too, but neither of them would get a placement like this one again, not with the economy. Then Santi thought about his nephew. What was he going to do about Calvin? Santi took his tea things from out of his desk, his tea bags, his Splenda, and his mug. Might as well. He got up and walked past Diane as if everything was normal. He smiled and said, "Be right back, hun." "Okay, boo," Diane smiled back. "Boo this, boo that," he thought. And what was that tone in her voice? He asked himself. That. He couldn't think of the right word for her. Of course, Diane must know, he thought. But of course, Diane would pretend she didn't know anything. That's what people did. But Santi knew. Oh, he could see what really went on every day. Pretending that went on in this office was 10 times more than all of the acting and all of the stories on the mini TV Shirley at front desk thought no one ever saw her watch all afternoon. The lawyers pretended to care about justice and rights and the underdog. Ray pretended to be in charge. And Diane, she pretended to be interested in the lawyers running in and out of court all day long. Good mornings and have a blessed day to everyone. The Bible sat shut on her desk, but there was judgment in her eyes when Santi would come in with his fashion, his touch of eyeliner, his gold prendas. Meanwhile, Diane's job was the same boring job as his, opening the mail, word processing, answering the phone, making copies, taking staples out of papers before throwing them into the shredding bin in the copy room. But Santi didn't think he needed to act like the first lady. Santi walked to the staff lunchroom. He filled his mug with tap water and put it into the microwave. 2 minutes. He looked around as if seeing this for the first time. The dirty tables, dirty chairs, dirty floors. Nobody cared. But Santi's apartment was clean. Soon, he'd be spending more time there. Now, it would be even cleaner. Clean with Windex and Pledge and Ajax and Maestro Limpio. He'd have time. The 2 minutes passed and Santi opened the door. The mug was steaming and the water was bubbling. Tea should be hot, he thought. He dropped in his Lipton tea bag and the water sizzled like hot oil for a second. Then the tea bag sank a little. Santi poked the tea bag and the water began to turn a beautiful color before you add the milk. Santi was like that, he thought, light and sweet, not like Diane who took lemon. The tea bag floated up again, flat on the surface. Santi thought about Talvin, the time he and Yvette watched him taking swimming lessons at the boys' club. His little body in all that water, how that boy could swim. Santi didn't like the water and had never learned to swim. Talvin loved the water. Yvette had made him promise to provide Talvin with the things that she would not be able to give once she was gone. She had grabbed Santi's hands in her own hands, which had always reminded him of cute little bird feet, and held them so tight the thought made him bite his lip. And he had said to Yvette in the Terence Cardinal Cook Hospice sunroom, overlooking the winter trees in the park across 110th Street, "I promise, I swear it, mamita." Santi lifted out the tea bag with the spoon he had brought from home. He wrapped the little string around the plump bag and pressed out the last drops, then threw it into the garbage can under the sink. He was adding the milk and Splenda when one of the Westchester associate lawyers came into the lunchroom. Young and smooth, gay and proud in tight pants. "Hi, Santiago," the lawyer said, walking over to the vending machines. "Hello," Santi answered, stirring. The associate asked, staring at the candy, "Plans for the weekend?" Santi thought about it for a second and then said, "I'm attending a social function." "It's gay pride," the associate said in a lower voice. Santi paused and replied, "I know." He thinks it's some damn secret, he thought. Anyway, the young lawyer went on, turning to Santi. "Don't know what I'm doing myself yet. The parade, the dance on the pier, maybe Fire Island instead. Who knows?" he continued. "Not coming in on Monday anyway." A party boy raised his hands and pushed at an imaginary roof and moved his hips a little. Santi smiled and nodded and answered him silently, "What a loca." The Westchester lawyer waved and walked out of the lunchroom, trying not to jiggle his ass too much. "See you later, Santiago," he called out, back turned. "Later," said Santi, and shook his head. The lawyer hadn't bought anything from the machine. Santi felt as if he'd won an argument. As he made his way back to his desk, Santi went over the past week in his mind. He hadn't planned it that way, but on Monday he had stayed home. He had woken up that morning and taken Talvin to school. That's when he realized his subway reading was still on the nightstand, so he turned around and walked back to the apartment. It took him longer than he thought because he stopped at the Duane Reade to pick up a prescription. He really had intended to go to the office, but all of a sudden he couldn't bring himself to leave. He had called Diane's cell and told her he wasn't coming in. Ray had told him when he started working there to call Diane when he was running late and not to bother him with calls like that. So that's what Santi did. He had spent the morning, how fast it flew by, reading his Vanity Fair, pruning the houseplants, and before he knew it, time for lunch at the Cuchifrito. He ate most of the chicken and all of the beans, but only half the rice, and 2 bites of flan because of his sugar. It was a sunny day, so he took a walk and went home for a nap. And the next thing he knew, it was time to pick up Talvin. He chatted with the security guards and reminded himself to bring them some coquito at Christmas. Then all the way home and Talvin's bath and dinner, then homework, a little Game Boy, story, and bedtime. His own shower came next, and then his own shows, and onto the internet to watch his pornos. He fell asleep after that. Tuesday, he had woken up feeling so rested he couldn't remember the last time he had felt so good. He surprised himself and called Diane to tell her he wasn't coming in. He took Talvin to school and played hooky the same way he had done the day before. On Wednesday, he had called out again. Was there something wrong? Diane wanted to know. Santi said, everything's fine. Did he have to explain himself to Diane? Was Diane his boss? He got the itch that afternoon and went on Grindr and hooked up with a guy who worked for transit. He put on his puto jeans and they took a long walk to Van Cortlandt to avoid his wife, he said. And even though it had turned a little rainy, they did it outside and he got some much needed sucky fucky. He had a blue freeze pop after that and picked up Talvin a little late. Santi slowed his pace to pass the deposition room, suits everywhere, and a crying woman sitting at a conference table. On Thursday, he had kept Talvin home. It already felt like a long time ago. They went to the Museum of Natural History. What a smart kid he was. Nowadays, they call it gifted and talented. Oh, Miss Thing, he had fought hard for that shit. Hard. Meetings on top of meetings and not taking no for an answer. And if he had to claw over the faces of every Upper East Side mom with a Dooney Burke handbag, he was going to get Talvin into the right school when the time came, come zip code, extra lessons, placement tests, or whatever. He had given Yvette his promise after all, and his bedroom had gone to the boy, and he had moved himself into the living room. He slept on the sofa. There was never any evidence of Carlos when child welfare came for their visits, and he was always ready with coffee and cake. They loved Talvin, and the adoption was almost done. Everyone could see he was going to be someone, an architect or an interior decorator, Talvin said. Whatever you want, Papi, Santi laughed, excited to hear those things. And who knew? Talvin was very intelligent and a real cutie. Talvin could have a future. Santi liked to think that Talvin took after him. Well, at least in his eyes, if nothing else. If only he and Carlos could have stayed together. But Carlos couldn't handle fatherhood, and the apartment was too small for three. Santi hardly ever let himself have those thoughts, though, because it would make him have too many feelings, and he'd think of his Yvette, and that would make him remember. And the next thing, he'd get the moody blues. There were 17 cubicles and 12 windows on the way back, all of it memorized over the past 2 years. The 12 office windows Santi passed faced ground zero, but he didn't look. What for? On 9/11, he had been home. Yvette had called from her job at the Conway near Macy's. Talvin hadn't been born yet. Santi had walked all the way there to meet her and walk her back home. It took hours. Yvette was so freaked out, they stayed together for days, watching the TV and getting takeout food. They had missed a whole week of work until things were better. Of course, he wasn't working downtown at the time. He was still cutting hair. And when he came back in, unlike the lawyers and Ray and Diane, those folks were happy to see him. After that, he tried to forget about the whole thing. And now, at last, it was TGIF Friday, and People's Express temps had fucked him and all his good feelings. Right as soon as Santi walked through the door, Diane said, "Good morning, Santiago. You had a call and I put it straight through to your voicemail." Diane sounded different, though, and that's when Santi should have known. Santi said, "Thank you, Diane," and listened to the message left at 8:14 a.m. He heard the words complaints and unexplained absence from the lady at the agency. The other words he hadn't caught. The lady's voice was too small for him to pay complete attention. Diane didn't turn around, but Santi felt she had something to do with it. Maybe it was something Diane told Ray about him. Should he ask her? Diane could get a lot across with just her tone. Some people were lucky that way. Santi felt he always had to spell everything out. And even so, people still had a hard time getting his meaning. He reached his cubicle at last and sat down with his tea. He could tell Diane was talking to her boyfriend because Diane always whispered to him. The rest of the time, she was loud. He took his book from his backpack. She shot him a look. He caught it and froze her with his eyes. It was Elin Harris he was reading. Men Were Dogs, the Same Old. He put in his earbuds and selected an album off his iPod. Albums, he thought. Nobody called them that anymore. Donny Hathaway's name lit up. He had such a sweet way of singing, as if he was singing only for you, that it cut Santi's heart like a knife through a bizcocho from Valencia Bakery. He would have liked to have met Donny Hathaway. There had been rumors. All at once, he felt like crying. He died so young. Oh, why? He blinked and 2 hot tears fell onto his timesheet. Donny died too damn young. Yvette and the fucking HIV. I told her not to trust that cabron boyfriend. He was surprised by the anger rising up in him like the heat from his mug. It wasn't fair. But life's not fair, he thought. It don't make sense. Look at this place right here. A poor Mexican breaks his back falling from a construction site. The lawyers buy a condo off it in Florida with their money, and the worker gets a custom handicap van with an elevator for his wheelchair. Look at me, of all people, raising my sister's kid like a single mother. He looked at Diane. Who the fuck was her? Just try and do better. sitting there so righteous with her Will Smith, Obama, Betty Boop family problems every day, the same fights or money troubles as Santi. But there she is all dressed up and sitting on her throne like RuPaul. Monique was more like it when Diane started working her bemba. Santi stopped himself. He dried his eyes and blotted the tear stains on the time card so the ink wouldn't smudge. He was being mean. He didn't want to be a bitch. He didn't want to sink to their low level. It wasn't right what they had done, but showing his feelings to these people was beneath him. He had been there 2 years and worked for all of them honestly. 2 whole years, no benefits. He had never slipped up but this one time, and he couldn't even explain to them why. And now they could not care less. Just poof, bye-bye. Well, they could say what they want, but he had his pride. Gay pride, Puerto Rican pride, you name it pride. He could have hated himself. He could have wanted pity, but no. He wasn't going down yet, not without a fight, puñeta. Santi wasn't feeling like Donnie anymore. He shuffled his music. It landed on Ike and Tina. Things had been worse. Santi poured his untasted tea into the garbage pail under his desk with a steady hand. He would hold his head high. He would just go. Thank you.
Good stuff, Gerard. I forgot, you did tell me you were going to read something else. I've been sick, I'm sorry. I also should point out, while Gerard was reading, don't sit down, Carol. Just stand and wave. Carol Rosenfeld, the chair of the Publishing Triangle. So thank you for coming, Carol. One of the things I also wanted to add was that we're going to, I'm hoping, have these lined up straight through next June, if not into next summer. It's a little tough here in the summer. Any readers who are here, any writers who are here, I should say, or who are out in the audience would be interested in reading in this series, and you can zoom in if you want. I would encourage you to drop us a line at publishingtriangle@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you and we'll slate you for something. I'm already starting to put January together, so Michael Thomas Ford will be back. Our next reader is Jim Berg. He's also a member of the Publishing Triangle Board, and he's a recovering academic. Jim is a freelance editor, consultant, and a writer. And last year he read from this piece, Geraldo Rivera Outed Me on national television. Tonight, he will read for the first time from his novel in progress, Jim Berg.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks Publishing Triangle, and thanks to the Bureau. This is a queer enemies to lovers novel set in a small town bakery in the mid-90s. The 2 men are named Connor and Layden, and they've been writing to each other through the personal ads and don't know it. A while back, there was a thing going around on my social media about change a movie title with 1 letter. So this is the title I hit on for this book, The Fabulous Bakery Boys. You got it right away. Smart group. Connor Ford's mother finally sat him down and told him what his father wouldn't. We've spent a lot of time in California and we got to like it, Lois Ford said. And your father would like to enjoy it there. It's now that he's getting better treatment. It was mid-March 1996. It's still winter in central Minnesota. Lois and Steve Ford had been away and came back, and now they were going away again for good. Connor sat at the kitchen table where he'd been studying for an accounting exam. His father was downstairs baking, where he had been from 3 a.m. to noon, 6 days a week for the last 35 years. Call it early retirement, Lois said. You're 60, Connor said. I beg your pardon, I'm 59. Your father is 60. Whatever, isn't that still too young to retire? Lois nodded and took a sip of her coffee. It seemed like she was trying not to cry. Connor knew what she wasn't saying. They were worried that Steve's arthritis would develop develop into something even more debilitating, eventually, if not soon. The wind outside whistled as if calling the kids home for supper. The snow whipped around the corner. The radio on top of the refrigerator was tuned to Lois's favorite FM station, which claimed to play the music of your life. Liza Minnelli was telling him that life was a cabaret. The last time they sat at the table, crying and not crying, was when Connor came out to his mom. Now he watched her sip her coffee and knew that she was thinking about what to say next. He waited, sipping his own cup. Connor's parents had built the Fort Bakery in Lake Stacy, a town of about 20,000, in 1961. At that time, Steve Fort claimed, no small town in Minnesota was without a family bakery. Donuts were the things that brought people in before work. At lunchtime, folks enjoyed a Cornish pasty at the coffee counter. Steve and Lois ran the bakery together and lived in the apartment above. Lois handled the money and the staff, and Steve was in the kitchen baking. Their first son, Wendell, was born in 1965, and Connor followed 10 years later. They had never talked about retiring, even when Steve was having more and more trouble over the last year. Finally, Lois was ready to speak. We'll go to Palm Springs in a few days and look around. Aunt Nancy says that every third person there is a real estate agent, so we should find a place easily. When we come back, before the Easter rush, and we'll pack up. Is it bad? Connor asked. What? No. Zip. I told you, sweetie, we're getting treatment. They have a lot of good doctors in Palm Springs. They call it God's waiting room, after all. There are a lot of geriatric specialists. He's hardly geriatric. No, but it's a disease of age and no one is getting any younger. Connor had watched his dad shuffling around the apartment and downstairs in the bakery. Steve had never said anything out loud, but it was clear he was in pain, especially in his hands, which were getting more gnarled. There were things he could still do, but not for 6 or 8 hours a day anymore. So you're really moving? Connor shook his head. What happens to the shop? We'd like you to take over the bakery. What are you talking about? He nearly dropped his coffee cup. I don't bake. Stop being so dramatic, Lois said. Connor looked away and out the kitchen window. The business was important to them, and it was important to him too. It was his home. The Fort Bakery stood at the corner of Harriet Avenue and 3rd Street, anchoring this little town. The other businesses were all small and family-owned too. Larson's Grocery, Nelson's Cafe. There were also 2 bars on the block. One featured beers from around the world and fried calamari. The other had Bud Light and Tombstone Pizza. In the way of small towns everywhere, the bar owners hadn't spoken to each other in years. There was an old hotel directly across from the bakery, but it had been closed for a long time. Connor remembered going to the restaurant there for Mother's Day as a kid. You know the business better than anyone, Lois said. What does Wendell have to say about all of this? Your brother is a banker, not a baker. It was an old joke, but it still amused them both. You can take over for me in front and manage the money. Layden will handle the baking. It'll be fine. Layden Roberts, the assistant baker. Connor was away at college when he started. Layden was about 25, older than Connor by 4 years. Whenever his dad was away, Connor struggled to deal with Layden. Just last week, Connor was putting together a large order and searching the kitchen for 2 loaves of raw bread. After 5 minutes, he asked Layden, who just pointed to the shelf they were on, wrapped and ready. Then Layden scowled and turned away. He muttered, dumbass, as Connor left the kitchen. Oh my God, that will never work, Connor said. Lois sipped her coffee. Connor didn't want to come off as uncooperative. If his parents thought it would be a good arrangement, he owed it to them to think about it. His mother wouldn't ask him to do something he couldn't handle. Lois had always been Connor's advocate and protector. When he was a little boy and very sensitive, she had scolded her own mother when she said Connor was, quote, too pretty to be a boy. Lois said, of course he's a boy. He looks just like pictures of Steve when he was that age. But the phrase too pretty hung around his neck for years. His brother Wendell brought it out whenever he thought Connor was being dumb or lazy. But Connor also saw it as a diagnosis of his failures as a boy. His dad eventually gave up trying to interest him in baseball, which Connor found boring, or hockey, dangerous and mean. Meeting other pretty boys in college helped him accept the description. He owned it by bleaching his hair and wearing a bit of blush some days. Lois kept Steve from ignoring Connor completely by giving him small jobs to do around the bakery. He was cleaning floors and washing pans by the time he was 12. Once she discovered he was good with numbers, she had him running the till. Connor, she said, drawing his attention away from the frozen lake in the distance. This isn't ideal. Your father would love to keep working until he's 80, but he's accepted that it isn't possible. It's going to be hard for him leaving this place, giving up the work he loves. But we need this to work. At least I need you to try. You can work something out with Layden. She set her coffee mug down on the table with a clack. Connor recognized her signal. The conversation was over. Oh, come on, she said. There's nothing wrong with Layden Roberts. Your dad thinks very highly of you. You will be in charge. Connor ran his hands through his hair. His roots were coming in under the long shock of bleach blonde hair. Has Dad talked to Layden about this? He will this afternoon. A coordinated effort, Connor thought. The Forts had always been a successful business partnership. I have to go to school. Connor stood and went to his bathroom. He put extra gel in his hair and a little bit more blush on. Looking good is feeling good, Connor, he said to his reflection. He wore a white polo under a plain blue sweatshirt. He didn't like brand names or symbols on his clothing, like Tommy or even the Nike swoosh. It made him think people were looking at his chest or his skinny frame. He knew he was tall and skinny and there wasn't much he could do about it. He went back to the kitchen and grabbed his backpack. Lois walked over to him while he put on his parka and headband in the back entryway. We'll talk more about this later, hon. Lois hugged him. At the bottom of the stairs, Connor opened the garage. Then he turned around and faced the door to the bakery. He stood as if he could look through the door and see his dad baking in the big hot kitchen. He really didn't know what he would say to the man. Ask how he felt? Was he in pain? Probably not. Connor knew his dad had trouble expressing an emotion, any of them. His Norwegian upbringing hadn't trained him for that. Instead, Connor went into the garage and pressed the remote. The cold air pulled in before he could get into his ancient Celica. He let the car warm up, then left the garage and turned toward the highway. There wasn't much time for him to get used to the idea of taking over the business or of his parents moving. He did know the business. When he came back from college in Minneapolis, Lois had put him to work and gave him more responsibility than he had had before. It was unsaid, but clear that she wanted him to take her job at some point. He had his doubts. He wasn't sure he wanted to stay in Lake Stacy, keep living above the shop. But once he started back to school, taking business classes this time, he saw the possibilities. Their retirement had seemed so far away then. He knew at the time that he didn't want to go back to the U. He had fucked all that up and didn't want to repeat the experience. So he agreed to pitch in more, do the books with Lois and take care of the invoices. He told himself that it didn't mean he would be stuck in this town forever. His car rattled over the railroad tracks as he left downtown. Connor popped in his well-worn cassette of Jagged Little Pill and listened to the Alanis Morissette complain about life sneaking up on him. He had to agree.
Thank you, Jim Bird. Our next reader will be Drew Pissarra. He's the author of two short story collections, You're Pretty Gay and Public Spanking, two radio plays, The Strange Case of Nick M. and Price in Purgatory, two stage comedies, Click and Tea Towels, and two sonnet collections, Infinity Standing Up and Periodic Boyfriends. Also, he's the author of a recent poetry collection that hasn't a single sonnet in it. Fastbinder, his movies, my poems. Please welcome Drew Pissarra.
Thank you so much. I do want to acknowledge the art behind me because it's so great as a backdrop. And the Bureau of General Services always has really great exhibitions. So thank you. So I'm going to read 4 poems from my new book. I'm going to start off with one called Utzelmacher. Hatsamaker. First, I thought I'd read a poem about hate. Then I thought I'd read a poem about gossip. Then I thought I'd write a poem about what it means to be mean, like what's its meaning. Then I felt bad for being so negative. Then I felt that poem has already been written many times by many people. Then I felt defeated. Then I masturbated. Next, I thought I'd write something about cruelty. Then I thought, why not murder instead of cruelty? Then I thought, why not rape instead of murder? Then I felt bad for not taking rape seriously. Then I felt no one takes anything seriously anymore. Then I couldn't even take that thought very seriously. Then I masturbated. Finally, I thought, write a poem about masturbating. Then I thought, write that poem while masturbating. Then I felt, you're running out of ideas. I'm running out of ideas. This is masturbation. The first time I read that poem aloud, a friend of mine was going to do a podcast about poetry and interview the author after they read. And I read that poem, and then she was like, I don't want to do this podcast. And that was the end of that podcast. The next one is The American Soldier. All of the poems in this book are inspired by Fassbinder's films, but it doesn't matter if you haven't seen it. So, The American Soldier. I'm gonna get drunk on Valentine whiskey and travel in illegal firearms and stay in seedy fleabag hotels and have illicit affairs with beautiful people already involved with marginally attractive other people who are corrupt and think money solves all their problems and keep their precious belongings in rickety lockers located in bus stations or train stations or athletic clubs or in safe deposit boxes or in safes. I'm so tired of being safe. I'm gonna get fucked, literally fucked, and sleep with whomever I want, whenever I want, and sometimes even with those I don't really want, but just kind of want, and not when I totally want to, but sometimes when I have to, and I want them to desire me and obsess about me and dream about me and constantly come up with new ways to please me, challenge me, intoxicate me, and call me so often I have to get my phone number changed. I want to change. I'm going to be sick. Not with cancer or AIDS or alcoholism or post-traumatic stress disorder or even depression, but with a disease that hasn't even been invented yet. A disease that no one's even had before. And when I get it, they're not going to know what it is at first. So they're going to misdiagnose me until they finally figure it out, what it is. And then they're going to be so surprised that they won't know what to do except to name it after me. It's going to happen. I'm going to do something. I'm going to be somebody. Just wait. I've always been really scared to read that. That was sort of my breakthrough. The next one is Ali, Fear Eats the Soul. Do I hear the whisper of someone who knows the movie? Yeah, okay. This one's for you. Ali, Fear Eats the Soul. I don't know what you see when you look at me. When I'm not looking at you, not looking into your eyes that might be deep, deep or kind, or dull, or dead. Not dead to me, no, always dear, my dear. When I look at them, it's as if there's too much there, for I can't say if they see me. Can't see if you see what I'm trying to say, or catch my attempt to relay how I sometimes see in me new you behind those eyes, inviting me in, demanding that I stay where I am, being me if I dare, daring me to bear some hidden part that is and isn't quite the heart before your unsparing gaze deftly strips me to the core again, completely in a glance that may mean no more than nothing at all, yet haunts me with the off chance that you may say the unspeakable now and then quickly look away. At least that's how I feel today. And then the last poem I'm going to read is Lola. Lola. At some point in his or her life, every poet has to write a poem about mother. Not because he's angry, not because she's sentimental, but because mothers, more than fathers, nudge us down paths of respectability. They grin and cajole and wax judgmental so that 40 years later we stand in the middle of a life we half picked, suddenly stunned that we only resisted halfway. My mom once caught me masturbating, then shut the door and asked if I wanted pancakes. I locked eyes with my mom while simulating sex on stage in a nightclub in Baltimore. In neither case was she shocked, at most curious. Who is this stranger? Her pursed mouth seemed to say. I sometimes wonder if she ever recounts either incident to her neighbor, a former coworker who takes care of Lola, my mother's dog, whenever mom's away. Does my mom ever experience a flashback while down on all fours and scrubbing random linoleum? Does she think that I've outgrown her? Did I ever grow up at all? Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. One of the things we're proud about with the series, by the way, is bringing you the voices of new writers, some people that are just getting published, and some people that have been honored as lions of queer literature for decades, and yet are still young, which brings me to our next reader, Trevor Healy. Still young, Trevor, but a lion, nevertheless. Trevor is an American poet and novelist. He spent his 20s in San Francisco, city where he was born and where he was active in the spoken word scene of the late 1980s and early 1990s, publishing 5 chapbooks of poetry as well as numerous poems and short stories in various reviews, journals, anthologies, and zines. In 2002, Through It Came Bright Colors won both the Farrell Grumley Award and the Violet Quill Award. And Gay Today named it as one of the 10 best novels of 2003. He won a second Farrell Grumley Award, which is given out, by the way, by the Farrell Grumley Foundation in conjunction with the Publishing Triangle, in 2013 for A Horse Named Sorrow. That year, he was also awarded the Jim Duggan's Outstanding Mid-Career Novelist Prize from the Literary Foundation, and he's now on the East Coast tour to promote the re-release of his 2016 short story collection, Eros and Dust. Please welcome Trevor Healy.
Thank you. So I'm going to read a story from this new, Eros and Dust was published in 2016, but they reissued it along with some other books. So this story is called Queer Theory, and it's really fan fiction, I guess, about Jack Kerouac if he had embraced his homosexuality instead of, what he did instead. So it's kind of written in that style. Blow, baby, blow, I yelled into the mob, orgasmic bliss as the angel-headed Marco bobbed up and down on my sad, ghostly, hungry shaft. Long after beers drunk too swiftly and sultry afternoon of San Francisco July, when the boys take their shirts off and temptation is around every bend, and I couldn't help myself and into his little overpriced studio with beads hanging in the doorway and needles full of crystal meth atop the stereo, and an old half-empty bottle of red wine echoing the joys of nights spent long before this too bright afternoon, when I later learned Marco had been fucking Cody and Alva and all the gang before I even got here. But it's a long, long story, and I'm so tired and impotent now, I'd have to go all the way back to that forlorn summer of groping bodhisattvas and the white, milky sunburst of Marco. It was San Francisco in the summer of 1989, and there wasn't a boy I couldn't make, and did make them all until the final foggy days of August, humping their way through the Golden Gate, and I was sad, and Cody and Alva gone, and Marco too, gone, and me with a stubborn case of clap to boot. And Marco, angelic choired songs singing orgasms of sweating summer nights in Oakland Hills, and Alva going on about Cavafy and Rumi and all the other long dead buggering poets of antiquity and beyond. Cody said right out, I'd sooner suck your cock than read your damn poetry, Alva. And Alva pulling off his belt and letting it fall heavy out of his pants. He wears no underwear, old Jew of the desert, sackcloth and ashes in his baggy pants, uncuffed and unpleated. It's in the first stars of the evening in the Berkeley backyard, and Cody falls to his knees, genuflecting and paying homage to the sad religion of a desert people that predated our own and sent us on this long, sad journey of unredemption and fear of an angry God out to prove we're nothing but a bunch of deadbeat winos, sloppy with our sacrifice, and he must be appeased. Cody got into turning Alva around now, and after fumbling impatiently with a condom, proceeded to expertly put it in him with a groan like a camel passing through the eye of a needle. And so I went inside to find Marco, who'd fallen into a tea stupor watching Jeopardy on the television and muttering sutras or poems. I couldn't tell which, but it was holy, as are all these ruined words. And not 2 days later, Marco had nearly overdosed on crystal, and so was gathered up by his mother and father in sad, dusty mauve Oldsmobile, driven all the way down from Sacramento on a lonely Sunday wherein no one went to mass and traffic snarled and hated, heated lack of love, and Christ would have been disappointed even and was probably a tired Mexican field hand gathering strawberries or kiwis, unbeknownst to all the lost wanderers on the American going nowhere highway of it all. He'd said he'd be back in a week, calling me from the loud, noisome corridor of SF General above the din of crying mothers, their babies shot in drive-bys, and old folks choking out their own phlegm amidst the shivering, withered homosexuals dying of a plague that terrified us all into compulsive fucking and denial and death wishes and sometimes even caution, or at least the rote ritual of condoms like lit incense and invocation, appeasement. And then, too, there were the harried doctors, Christ-like, trying to love their neighbor, heal the sick, and giving up sometimes even as green lines ran straight across cardiac machines, echoing the sad end of us all in white corridors and mop tiles of disinfectant stinking floors ripe for death and decay. So a week gone, I went looking for Marco, who'd sent me a sad little postcard of Old Town Sacramento with pictures of broken brick wino alleys refurbished into the horror of a suburban tourist mall. I came stumbling off the tired mule train of the underground Muni, dying its slow death at $1 a ride. Hey, bud, I yelled as it stalled for the 8th time. What's this, a subway worse than Amtrak? And you can get off then, he snapped, and turning to glare me down, I recognized him as a sax man from the little club on 3rd Street and apologized profusely, like confession, and bless me, Father, for I have sinned, a poor sinner, and I know not what I do. I hopped out then and there and tripped up the steps to Market Street, busy with suited booby prize, lost American working man and woman rushing madness, and the Gabrielic shouts of bike messengers warning them all of impending disaster and imminent destruction, sweet rapture hanging from their waists. I wanted Marco to make sweet love to me. His bejeweled, flower-decked bodhisattva sphincter would open for me like a lotus flower. It would sing sutras while I rode latex-clad and swollen through the old hobo rails, deep in his groaning rectum, sad and forlorn with loss of another turd that very day. Last night I'd nearly given up the ghost, drinking wine with Cody, ambling our way down Folsom Street, missing my sweet 19-year-old boy man who I told everyone I met was a saint for sure, an angel sent from the lonely nowhere of Central Valley, California, where the railroads died and gave birth to a messianic hobo boy named Marco. Bartenders yelping at me to get out and carry on my crazy lovelorn ranting somewhere else, which I did until waking up on the floor in a pool of my own vomit and not a small number of men's wads in the back room of some bear bar where I was later told I sucked off the whole house. The debate of whether oral sex was safe or no obliterated 6 throbbing inches at a time, all but forgotten in the missing of Marco and the desire for his manhood and any and all takers. And all in a half hour's time, accomplishing some of the finest blowjobs many of these men had ever known, and all for the missing of Marco. And the other nights with my dear Marco gone were the same, and I'm him seeing mirages on street corners and in dance clubs of the golden locks and smile of my man-child, my very own Antinous, who'd been the sweet boy lover of the Emperor Hadrian and the honey-colored ancient world, forever smothered in the old greasy olive oil of time. And I'm one sad Roman emperor with no empire but an old bottle of port and a limp cock, HIV lurking everywhere like a dying doll, and maybe in my very own throat, weaving my way down Howard Street looking for an all-night market to get me a refill of this here nectar, hoping the alcohol will obliterate any disease, but all it does is bring before me visions of Marco and deep dreamings, even while I walk of Marco Antinous, golden favorite of Caesar and dead all these long years in the Nile, and it can't be he's gone. And what if he's got it and is right now withering among fruit orchards in the Central Valley, their blossoms fallen, rotten fruit like a foul offering from a mocking god scattered at his feet, his body curled in fetal position, and fear fills me at the whereabouts and condition of my guardian angel lost, satyr born 2,500 years too late for our destined acropolyptic love-fucking come blast in the dawn of civilization. But it's all premature and delusional. And Marco returns on schedule, his head hung low with a big bag on his back at the Greyhound station. I run to him and hug him hard in my arms, witnessing his sad visage because he's disappointed the folks. And before now, they didn't even know he was gay and knocked out on a dozen different drugs, living in a Haight-Ashbury and making his money doing massage and selling speed. And it's okay, Marco, I say, I still haven't come out to my mother. But she'd send me money anyway, I think, and it's not important. What's important is the apple red in your cheeks, and that we get back to my hotel room down on 6th Street, and I drive this train into your empty Wyoming of droughted ranch lands and cattle stalls staring at the highway, and you'll forget, Marco, you'll forget the pain in your parents both. Marco nods his head and is soon shooting speed in an alleyway while I run to the corner for a bottle. And then me and Marco are arguing with the guy at the desk because this Fleabag residential hotel has a big no guests in the room sign in the lobby. And I want to tell him that this fine Bodhi boy emanation of the very Buddha himself, who loves all beings endlessly and without preference, is a different story altogether from the guest, and will in fact rain blessings of flowers and rainbow light on this very nowhere sad hell of a hotel. But I'm drunk and in my own way sort of closeted, so I jabber a few pleas and fall silent. And I'm unself-confident now, especially on 6th Street, where you need to be a transvestite or a violent son of the devil to get any respect. And I'm certainly not either. I'm just another broken down wino. But Marco persists. Well, come on, dude, be a bro. And the manager finally agrees, throwing his hands up. Go ahead, do whatever you want. The world's a sty and I can't stop it from falling apart before my eyes. I don't care anymore. I'll give you 20 minutes. And I find relief in a crazy kind of satori with Marco as we get stiff and sinfully hungry, and I beg him to bear back, and he nods with just a tad of reluctance. And I think I see the host as he comes. He's arrived too soon for the millennium, and my heart's not ready yet. And he's weeping now, and I give him a drink and more speed, and he calms down, burdened by the demands of Buddhahood and the certainty of being a reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion. And it's hard on young Marco, just a boy from Sacramento, become the one under whose very footsteps lotus flowers bloom, falling asleep in the arms of a horny old one.
Trevor Healy, thank you, Trevor. I actually, Lance, I apologize because I'm switching you around. You're going fifth, it says sixth. So. Lance Ringo is the two-time Lemmy nominee whose novels and plays bring gay history to life through vividly realized characters and meticulously researched detail. His debut novel, Flower of Iowa, about an American soldier and a British soldier who fall in love on the Western Front in World War I, received multiple literary accolades, including the Forward Indies Book of the Year Award for War and Military Fiction. Floridian Nights, his second novel, is an intense, multifaceted love story that unfolds against the backdrop of the AIDS epidemic of the late 1980s. In consecutive years, each of these novels was named as a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Gay Romance. Lance's plays include In Love with the Arrow Collar Man, about famed illustrator J.C. Leyendecker and his model, muse, and lover Charles Beach, and Flash Frozen, a drama based on true events about two champion male skaters whose lives fatefully intersect around the tragic 1961 plane crash that killed the entire U.S. figure skating world team. Both plays have enjoyed successful runs to considerable acclaim here in New York. Please welcome Lance Ringo.
Hey, hear me? This has nothing to do with gay history after all that introduction, which I really appreciate. I got the idea for this novel about a year ago and just 30 seconds worth of, I don't know if this has ever happened to you as a writer, but about 6 months into it, something happened in the popular culture that had a little too much overlap for my taste. So I finally went to check out and see whether I should keep writing. And after seeing it, I thought, yeah, keep writing. So this is the first chapter of that novel. I was supposed to be a baseball writer. Growing up in the Little Italy section of Montreal, I could never get enough of my papa's stories about just walking down the street from our apartment on the Boulevard Saint-Laurent to Parc Jarry to catch an Expos game. And even though by the time I was born, the Expos had long since decamped to the Olympic Stadium, and then, thanks to the utter perfidiousness of Major League Baseball, they abandoned Montreal altogether by the time I graduated from McGill University, somehow that dream stayed with me of being able to follow in Papa's footsteps and amble over to catch some major league action, which dream I eventually achieved, kind of, just not at all the way I anticipated. But I'm getting ahead of myself, which is something you will find is not uncommon. I was growing up in Little Italy because Papa's parents emigrated from Calabria to Montreal after World War II, settling near the Jean Talon market and taking first his generation, then mine, for mass every Sunday a few blocks away at the humongous Church of the Madonna della Difesa. Maman's family, on the other hand, were from Gascony, and she had been in Quebec for generations. You might guess none of my grandparents, especially on Maman's side, were totally thrilled that my parents fell in love. But there's a stubborn streak that runs clear through both sides of my family, and Mama and Papa had their minds made up. The family legend is that they conceived the first of their two children to the tune of I Just Want to Stop, a heartfelt ballad, then achieving worldwide popularity and fame for a giant-haired local boy named Gino Vanelli. But obviously they didn't just want to stop because 9 months later, my sister was born. Several years after that, about the time I was being conceived, another Montreal act, Men Without Hats, was making it big everywhere with a hit that was equal parts infectious and bizarre. That was called The Safety Dance, and come to think of it, this also proved to be a highly ineffective form of birth control because 9 months later, there I was. For reasons I never quite figured out, Papa got to choose my sister's name, so she's Catarina Maria. So then, of course, Mama got to name me, and I became Michel Marie, which I guess means my sister and I share a middle name, sort of. But the whole world knows me as Mike Marconi. Nota bene, we are absolutely no relation to famous inventor and notorious fascist Guglielmo Marconi. I can count on the fingers of my hands the number of people who know that Michel Marie is my real name, because I never share that. So consider yourself lucky. I was not about to deal with English speakers thinking I had two girls' names. And that is kind of funny when you think about it, because I grew up to be bisexual. Not the I'm straight and I tried it once, so aren't I cool kind of bisexual. And not the I'm gay, but I need a fig leaf here kind of bisexual, but an honest to God bisexual who likes both boys and girls and can relate to Woody Allen's famous comment about it doubling your chances of a date on Saturday night. With the kind of life I lead, I've never had a girlfriend or a boyfriend that stuck, and I guess I've never really wanted one. And no, I'm not going to count how many of each I've been with to satisfy your curiosity as to whether it's been a 50-50 split. As we say in French. Anyway, I disagree. I digress. When Papa was a kid, he was forced to go to Anglophone schools to keep his Italian from polluting the purity of the French language spoken at the Francophone schools. True story. As a result, I speak English, and I'm afraid I sound more like an American than anything, thanks to that, and especially thanks to television. And even though I don't like Americans, because who the hell ever really liked the bully next door? And I speak French like a Quebecois, because that's my home province, and also even though it annoys people from France, or maybe that's just an extra bonus. And I speak Italian like, I guess, my grandparents, because hearing Papa speak with Nana and Nana was the main way I learned Italian, although you heard it plenty all around the neighborhood. With Papa's Southern Italian blood mixed with Mama's Southern French blood, I had no choice to grow up dark. Dark eyes, dark hair, and sort of darkish skin. So there I was, a swarthy, trilingual, precocious little bisexual kid, walking on my own down the street now known as Rue Gary Carter, and don't you love that, to see the legendary Stade Parc Charvet. But instead of a baseball stadium, I found a tennis center. And with that twist of fate, my destiny was sealed. Instead of becoming a baseball writer, I would become and am a tennis writer. Okay, I know you might find that explanation too easy, but once I was old enough to make my way up the street those few blocks and attend the Tournoi de Tennis du Canada, aka the Canadian Open, in the Expo's original park, with one corner of the largest court located right where the old backstop used to sit behind home plate, my fickle sporting heart had found a new love. Let me tell you what I like about covering tennis. With the exception of my first love, and with all due credit to the immortal Yogi Berra, I can't think of any other sport where it's truly not over till it's over. I mean, you can be down 18 match points, trailing a set or two, and who knows how many breaks, and there's still a chance you can come back and win, and people have done exactly that. Let's face it, if the lead is great enough, there comes a point where you can't mathematically achieve a comeback. In football, whether you're talking about the Canadian or the American variety, or the sport the rest of the world calls by that name, or in basketball, or in hockey, or even golf. But in tennis, as in baseball, you can. It's also an individual sport. Well, there's doubles, which my best friend on the tour, Pierre Jean from French Guiana, plays exceptionally well. And doubles is a genuinely exciting sport. Much faster than singles, but it's always treated like a poor cousin, as Pierre and any double specialist will gladly tell you ad nauseum. But in singles, the player is out there all on his or her own, coaches, physios, and other entourage notwithstanding. As a writer and as a fan, you can focus on individuals, and oh boy, do we all ever do that. Normally mild-mannered and sane people become ferocious in defense of their favorites and in contempt of their chosen villains, because we get to know the players' personalities, or at least their personas, and there is no one else around to deflect that adoration or lack thereof. Tennis is also an incredibly cosmopolitan sport. Covering it, you cover the world because the tour is really the Women's Tennis Association, or WTA, and the Men's Association of Tennis Professionals, or ATP. Two great traveling circuses running separately and occasionally intersecting. The tours really and truly do span the globe, taking you to at least 6 continents. I've yet to meet a tennis player from Antarctica, but I expect to be among the first to report that if and when that happens. You constantly hear a variety of languages and accents, with English the convenient lingua franca, and you meet the most unbelievable cast of characters encompassing every country you can imagine. Tennis is also egalitarian, while simultaneously maintaining the most vicious of hierarchies. Thanks to the weekly rankings and the up-to-the-minute live rankings, as a player, you always know exactly where you stand, like it or not. But it's also true, as any observer, let alone fan, can tell you, that the margins of ability can be thin to the vanishing point between a player in the top 10 and one in the top 50, top 100, maybe even lower. I mean, you can cover, and I have covered, men's Challenger Tours events, where a guy you've never heard of who's ranked 273rd in the world is facing off against another guy you've never heard of who's ranked 434th in the world. And you're in some dilapidated park in some godforsaken town, and random bored pedestrians are walking by, and there are few to zero audience members, yet the quality of the tennis might be flat out fantastic because, hey, these guys are good. Being one of the top 500 players of a sport played by 87 million people worldwide is not nothing. So on any given day, that has the potential to make tennis as unpredictably exciting as anything you'll experience in athletics, in my humble opinion. Finally, at the risk of you dismissing me as some kind of perv, especially since I'm now on the far side of 40, though not too far, let me conclude with one of the sport's great secrets, or at least it was until a certain movie came out a year or so back. It's damn sexy. Where else can you find a sport that features extremely fit men and women running around all the time in skimpy outfits with tight, hip-hugging shorts and brief billowy skirts, or even the occasional catsuit? The both genders thing alone eliminates most other sports, and of those remaining, you can't tell me that basketball uniforms are mon Dieu, golf outfits hold a candle to tennis. Plus, you can't find the men and women who play basketball or golf competing in the same place at the same time. But in tennis, several times a year, you can. Though not exactly in Canada, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Anyway, before you conclude that I pose a threat to your racket-wielding sons and daughters, sisters and brothers, I should take this moment to emphasize that I am a professional. Like any good professional, I keep my business out of my business. That said, I got eyes, and for somebody who finds, say, the exquisitely muscled arms of both Serena Williams and Rafa Nadal smoking hot, I'd be a liar if I didn't say the eye candy is a major, major bonus. That's settled, I hope. You might ask, hey, Mike, how come you write about the sport instead of playing it? Well, I tried that for a bit in college, but I wasn't that good. And although competitive tennis is just a club sport at McGill, I didn't even come close to making the team. But I've always had a knack for talk, in case you can't tell, and I know how to report and write. So thanks to my schooling, I write better in English than in French, which puts me at a disadvantage in Montreal. But I would never move. I love my hometown. Yes, I know the winters are cold. See, I have a gift for understatement. But could there be anything cooler than living in this beautiful city, named after its own mountain, situated on an island in the middle of a huge river that past the city limits keeps spanning out wider and wider until it finally flows out into the ocean? Is there anything in the world more mellow than walking around Parc La Fontaine on an early fall day? In all my traveling for work, and I do a lot, I haven't found any place to compare to it. Of course, my mama and papa are still here in Little Italy, and they're getting on, so there's that. And my sister, Dr. Caterina Maria Marconi, lives and has her practice in the Plateau, which some magazine once voted the 4th best neighborhood in North America, while I have an apartment down a nice alley between shady streets Mile End, which recently got ranked the 5th coolest neighborhood in the world in some other survey. So what's not to like? As for what keeps me fed, I'm well aware that I'll always be a freelancer, grudgingly accepted at press conferences, always one of the last to get his questions answered after the folks from the big name outlets like ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and New York Times have been satisfied. But I have been lately getting steady work from a new self-styled upstart blog called The Tennist. Cringe name, I know, but the editor, Brock Brockington, you know I could make that up, is actually a hell of a nice guy who gives me free rein and pays promptly. Maybe that's why I've always had a soft spot for the players ranked somewhere between about 20th and 40th, the ones who have always made it to the place where the general public knows their names and have made it to where the tennis community definitely does. They're making a good living at doing something they love, even if mega celebrity status may ultimately yet elude them. As their journalistic equivalent, I can identify with that. And they're often the most interesting people anyway, at least in my mind. So that's me. I've got a good life, reliable in its own rhythms. Or at least it was until this past year, in the middle of the 3rd decade of the 21st century, when the sporting world I've come to call home was still getting its bearings after Serena and the big three had all finally moved on to post-tennis life. And I suddenly started to find myself a little too distracted, first by Paramitra Singh, WTA, India, and then by Para and her boyfriend, Jimmy O'Rourke, ATP, Ireland.
Thank you, Lance. By the way, nice turnout tonight. Before we get to our last reader, actually, I want to run through a couple of quick things. First, yes, again, excellent turnout, and hopefully on the YouTube too. But please come back next month. We will have another, right now 7, and there might be more writers. Ann McMahon, John Copenhaver, Daniel Meltz, Gary Zebrin, Nico Diaz, Jengi Ryder, and David S. Peterson. Will be zooming in from Canada, as a matter of fact. Actually, it's a couple of mystery writers, which is unusual for us. But we encourage that, as I think many people in this room know, and if you haven't, now you will. Starting 3 years ago, 3 years ago, we began offering an award, the Joseph Hansen Award for crime writing, funded by Michael Nava, and who also gave us the idea, created it. We are excited now that the mystery community is starting to pay attention and engage more with the Publishing Triangle. This year, by the way, we'll also be adding, last year we added the Jacqueline Woodson Award for children's and YA writing. And beginning next April 17th, as a matter of fact, will be our award ceremony. Mark the calendar today. There'll be a new award, the Amber Hollybow Award for Social Justice Writing, that will be funded by Jennifer Levin, Amber's surviving partner. And Jennifer will actually be reading at the November Outspoken. So, okay, and the only last two things, again, remember to submit your books for the Publishing Triangle Awards. $40 per submission. We have 10 competitive award categories. And the awards all carry a cash prize of $1,000. Become a member of the Publishing Triangle if you can. It's only $40 a year. We'll get you on our mailing list. You will know about things like this at the beginning of each month, except for when it's the summer and I get too busy or lazy. But we have mostly a monthly newsletter that goes out, and we'll get you up to date on everything we know about what's going on in the queer literary community. Finally, remember to support your independent booksellers like the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. And one thing that Mikey didn't mention before, Greg never mentions it either, but as a nonprofit, if you become a regular, say a sustaining member of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, that's a tax deduction. It isn't for the Publishing Triangle, frankly, but it is when you donate regularly to the Bureau of General Services. So, okay, thank you. And now for our last reader, Christopher Murray is a multidisciplinary artist living in Manhattan. His poetry has appeared in Windy City Times, Bloom, and as the poem of the day on NPR. His short films have been screened in New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles. He's a therapist in private practice. Please welcome Christopher Murray.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for doing this when you're not tip top. Okay, I love this time of year. There once was a mummy from Khartoum, fond of nuzzling his wife's right bazoon. Said she rather cold, if I might be so bold to request on the left you'd resume. Not until the end, please. There once was a gay old vampire who only oral sex did desire. For ever so long, he'd suck each guy's schlong, exsanguinating them until they'd expire. Dating a zombie, said Cheryl, it ain't so romantic. And I don't wish to sound rude nor pedantic, but when each time I cough, his penis falls off, I will admit I can get rather frantic. Though he found dating a narcoleptic quite boring, Mr. Hyde admitted she had aspects alluring. My thing's not that big, but she don't care a fig. She don't complain, at least not when she's snoring. Have you ever had sex with a ghost? Satisfying? Well, it's not the most. Though I screw with conviction, there's not so much friction, kind of like breakfast with all butter, no toast. And lastly, here's a fact not that well known about Dracula. His dining habits made him quite flatula. He'd strike up a match that stink to dispatch, igniting a conflagration rather spectacular. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can wrap this up now unless anyone, wants to just get up on the audience and read. Thank you all, and again, come back again on Wednesday, October 23rd, on Thursday, November 14th, and I will soon have dates in December, January, February, as soon as Greg and Donnie get back. I assume they're in Fire Island on their usual trip right now. Yeah. So as soon as they get back, I'll set those dates up and get on our mailing list so you will know when those dates are going to be and where what and who the readers